Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I am Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held wide-ranging and productive discussions with his Canadian counterpart Mark Carney, who was on an official visit to India from the 27th of February to the 2nd of March. Both the Prime Ministers reviewed the entire spectrum of bilateral cooperation. The discussions included areas of trade and investment, defence and security, education and culture, clean energy and critical minerals, AI and supercomputing, and also mobility. Both leaders also exchanged views on regional and global developments. They emphasized that terrorism, extremism and radicalisation pose serious challenges to humanity. Several MoUs in key areas including civil nuclear cooperation, energy, critical minerals, education and skill development, science and technology and culture were exchanged. Also, in a significant decision, it was agreed to double bilateral trade in goods and services to $50 billion by 2030. The leaders announced the formal launch of CEPA negotiations, the India-Canada Parliament Friendship Group and the India-Canada Defence Dialogue, advancing the India-Canada partnership. Also, the leaders emphasized early conclusion of CEPA and scaling up cooperation in civil, nuclear energy, critical minerals, AI, agritech, space, sustainable agriculture, security and financial services. So on the program today, we're going to analyze with distinguished guests some of the major announcements and outcomes emerging from Prime Minister Carney's visit to India, which was the first since he took over as the Prime Minister of Canada, also the first bilateral visit to India by a Canadian Prime Minister since 2018. To take the conversation further, we are joined by two guests, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, he's a former diplomat. Ambassador, thank you for joining in. Welcome to the program. We also have with us Mr. Pathikrit Pine. He's a Senior Research Fellow, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation. Mr. Pine, always a pleasure welcoming you on my programs. Today we're going to talk about some of the most significant outcomes. The list is quite substantive, 25 items in among the agreements and the MOUs and the announcements made post the meeting between both Prime Ministers. But to begin with you, Ambassador, is this the genuine reset that India and Canada were looking for, especially after relationship under Trudeau nosedived?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Tina, for having me on your show. You're very right. I think that's the correct word to use, reset, because our relationship really saw a huge decline, a huge downturn in 2023. That was a visit by Mr. Justin Trudeau to India to participate as the head of the Canadian government in the G20 summit meeting that took place in India. India was hosting it, and he went back from here on the 11th of September 2023, if I remember correctly, and then he stood up in the Canadian Parliament on the 18th of September, and he made this charge that, there were credible allegations. Now, your listeners and viewers can see that, what an oxymoron it is, what a contradiction in terms it is, because allegations can never be credible. Yeah. But he said that there are credible allegations that India was involved in the killing of a Canadian Sikh national, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The killing of that which had taken place on the 18th of June the same year. And of course, the very next day, India completely rubbished these allegations and asked Canada to provide, any sort of evidence till the time that Mr. Justin Trudeau left his prime ministership 2 years, a little more than a year and a half later. There was no evidence whatsoever that Canada could provide. Mm-hmm. So the relations had really dipped very low in 2024, in October 2024. India withdrew its High Commissioner from there. We withdrew 6 of our senior diplomats from there. This is the level to which the abysmal depth to which our relationship had nosedived. But then we saw the arrival of Mr. Mark Carney. He is also from the same party. He was also elected from the same party, although it was not thought that the Liberals would be able to come back because the performance of Justin Trudeau had been so miserable, and it was thought that the Conservatives would be able to win. But then, because of certain geopolitical changes, particularly as far as relations between the United States and Canada are concerned, Mr. Mark Carney, who was at the helm of affairs of the Liberal Party, he won the elections last year in April. And that was really the beginning as far as the upturn in our relationship is concerned. What one would say, the rest is history. But, he invited Prime Minister Modi to come to participate in the G7 summit in June in Calgary, in Canada. And that is when the first bilateral interaction took place. That was followed by the meeting of the two leaders in Johannesburg in November. And then this has culminated in the 4-day visit by Prime Minister Mark Carney here. But the last 1 year, meaning actually less than a year, because Mr. Carney came to office in April of last year, the last 10 months or so, has seen a spate of exchange of visits, whether it is by our External Affairs Minister, our Commerce Industry Minister, and vice versa, National Security Advisor, and a whole host of other ministers. So that, what you mentioned, whether it is in the area of trade and economic cooperation, the commitment to finalize the CEPA, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, increase trade to $50 billion US, and a whole host of other engagements and agreements. So the relationship appears to be on a sound footing, and looking very strongly to move in the upward direction.
Okay. We'll speak about some of the significant outcomes, the announcements that have been made in the joint statement in due course of the program. Let me bring in Mr. Pine into the discussion, get his perspective also on the aspect of the reset in India-Canada partnership, get his perspective and try and understand from you, Mr. Pine. Since we're talking about the reset and India is describing this as a new chapter in the India-Canada partnership, what is it that has driven us to this point where we are now willing to cooperate across sectors? The joint statement is quite elaborative. The list of agreements and outcomes is quite significant and substantive, 25 items in total. What is your assessment? What are the factors that have driven us to this kind of a reset, especially in Canada's context? Is it the economics? Is it the geopolitics? Is it the domestic political compulsions?
See, we have to look at this relationship from the reference point of his speech, the speech of the Canadian Prime Minister recently in the World Economic Forum, where he mentioned that the international rules-based system has ruptured, and that the great powers use economic integration, tariffs, and supply chain for subordination. He said that these are being weaponized. He talked about altering the old order with value-based realism. He talked about middle powers to emerge and take their own seat in the global arena. So this reset that is happening is not just about the nadir where Trudeau had left it. It is far more profound than that, because I think for many countries like Canada, the kind of statements that were coming from President Trump and the United States, where they were literally being termed as the 51st state of United States, the kind of allegations that the White House was putting on Canada for being responsible for the proliferation and supply of fentanyl within the United States, the kind of disdain that unfortunately the Canadians have been subjected to, or say on the issue of Greenland and many other cases. Many of these countries which have probably for a long period of time lived under the security umbrella of United States, even though they still do have relationship, I think there is a realization that there is a reset which is needed. For example, if you look at it from the context of non-Western countries like India, who have been part of forums like BRICS, or say Voice of Global South, which has come up as a viable proposition, it was a little surprising that many of the Western countries like Canada are now taking that step forward. There are other pertinent reasons for this as well. See, if you look at the kind of free trade agreements that many of the countries are actually signing with India, whether it's the European Union, Australia, United Kingdom, the Gulf nations, the GCC, working on that, and eventually the Americans. One of the most important reasons is this: Canada is like Russia, is a very, very resource-rich country, right. But it has a very, very small population. So in future, if they have to sustain their economic growth, if they have to remain relevant, number one, they require a substantial amount of workforce to work on this. Secondly, they need a market for ensuring that their products, whether it's the end product or whether it's raw materials or intermediary products, do get a place. And that's why for them having relationship with India is very, very important. And mind you, it's not just about the students from India who go in large numbers to Canada for study, even though that is also an important aspect. When it comes to issues like critical minerals, when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to semiconductors, when it comes to aerospace industry, remember Canada has a very, very niche yet important aerospace sector, which may not be as big as that of United States or the European countries, but it's still formidable. It's one of the most well-known organizations in the world in the arena of making business jets is Bombardier. They also make metro trains. Many of them are actually flying in India. So on all these areas, India actually works as a great place for their research and development, for manufacturing of goods, which are, for investments by the Canadian companies, and at the end of the day, also to ensure that they have what you call a ready-made market, which India is. And again, a very important aspect is this: unlike in countries like China, which is of course a very big market for Canadian companies as well, there is always this apprehension as to whether they can take their capital back, whether there is, whether it is assured or not, whether there's a guarantee of continuity of business, or whether someday something will happen. In case of India, because it is a country which is run by institutions, there is a very strong rule of law where the judiciary is as important as the executive. They feel far more comfortable in investing in a country like India. And apart from that, they have seen the way the tectonic shift in terms of the global economic theater, the way it is happening. They have seen the way countries like India have emerged as a viable alternate, which is putting up issues which are very important without getting into a confrontation mode, with the West. Say on issues of, say, India taking oil from Russia, India made it very clear that, it is only doing what is necessary to take care of the interest of 1.5 billion people. It is not trying to take specific sides in the war, and has always maintained that the most important thing is for conflicts to end. Whereas, unfortunately, perhaps there is a perception, there is a growing realization that many of the Western countries, for them, ensuring periodic war is perhaps a necessity to sustain their own economic model. So I think this is some kind of a harbinger of shape of things to come, when many of the middle powers, you may call, of the Western, bloc, are realizing that for far too long they are in a structure which has not worked too much for them, and in the future they might face a lot of things. For example, many of the European countries never believed and realized that someday America will threaten them with something like Greenland, or the kind of conflicts which are happening, say, in Europe, or what is happening in Middle East. So I think there's a realization, yes, but we have to understand one thing: Canada has its own limitations. There is a strong possibility of trade to grow up to $50 billion, which is very important. But let's understand, Canada has a very, very big Sikh population. There are elements who are extremely influential over there, and they have a separatist agenda. So to presume that in one day absolutely Canada will change is not possible.
Certainly.
But Canada
I think that's a very important point that you've made. Although foundational to our strategic partnership will always be the economic cooperation, and in that regard, we've seen several critical MoUs and agreements. But given the relationship that we've had with Canada and the reasons because of which the relationship declined in the past, and that's why it was heartening to hear in the press statement, Ambassador, both Prime Ministers unequivocally speaking firmly against terrorism, against radicalisation. how significant and how important was that messaging coming from the Canadian Prime Minister on Indian soil to restore that mutual trust? I think this has been one important takeaway, that important statement from the Canadian Prime Minister being made here in New Delhi, standing on the same platform as our Prime Minister.
No, you're absolutely right. I think if we were to go back also a little bit, just a couple of days ago, there was a statement that emanated from the Canadian authorities saying that India is not involved in any, inimical or hostile activities or anti-Canadian activities from the Canadian soil. That is very important because if you remember, the horrendous statement that was made by the Canadian Foreign Office in 2024 saying that somehow the Indian High Commissioner in Canada was involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in some way. There were some, reports also trying to suggest that maybe there were, senior Indian leaders who were behind it, who had a hand in it. That there was, this whole conspiracy to create disturbances in Canada. So I think that is behind us. And you would recall what Mr. Carney had said, when he had called Prime Minister Modi, this meeting took place in June, G7 meeting, June of last year. I think it was 16th, 17th of June, and he called Prime Minister Modi on the 6th of June, I remember vividly. And he had said that I have consulted the world leaders, and all world leaders have told me that the presence of India at the G7 is critical. It's very important, and that is why I have taken the decision to invite Prime Minister Modi, because that telephone call from Carney to Prime Minister Modi came rather late, because normally when invitations are sent for participation in such global summits, they are sent well in time. And of course the Prime Minister was gracious when he received the call. Notwithstanding the shortage of notice, he did go there, and that was a very important visit that took place. So I think the fact that the statement was made in terms of both the countries, they share so much in common. Both are democracies, both have, as far as the English language is concerned, the rule of law, pluralistic society. So that the fundamental basis, foundation of a strong relationship is there, and today I think truly marked the turning over of a new chapter. Of course, the fact what Pathikrit has said, and I fully agree with him. He's, explained it very eloquently that whatever has been happening, to an extent, we have to give credit to Mr. Trump for, pushing these countries together. Let's say the middle powers together, those who are not in the category. But of course, one also needs to keep in mind that when, an interviewer asked Carney about, two middle powers like India and Canada coming together, and then he stated that, yes, you can call Canada a middle power, but India is much more than a middle power. And I think that needs to be also to be taken cognizance of, the manner in which India, while there is instability all around the world, India is politically stable. India has been so in terms of its economy. It has been growing. It has become, from the 10th largest economy, has become the 4th largest economy, soon to become the 3rd largest economy in terms of, the huge initiatives that it has taken, not only domestically, but globally, internationally. And the mark it has created in terms of, its presidency of the G20 in 2023, the success that we were able to achieve, the leadership, or in terms of the articulation of the voice and the concerns of the global South. So India standing, even more than the bilateral context, India standing on the global stage, that has grown, that has increased. India is able to follow a policy of multi-alignment and strategic autonomy, whether it is in terms of our FTA with the European Union, the way we have gone forward, or it is in terms of India's membership both of the SCO and BRICS as also of the Quad and the G7. So I think these are all attributes of India that make it a very attractive partner. In addition to what we've been talking, for instance, CEPA, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and that increasing our trade to $50 billion, which is huge by 2030, in terms of collaboration in the area of critical minerals, because that is very significant since we see that there is a weaponization, literally of everything, but definitely of tariffs, of the critical minerals, what China is doing, as far as the areas of education, and that is an area where both the countries are cooperating very well, are doing extremely well, and we can move forward. The cooperation in the area of uranium, Canada is the second largest producer, only after Kazakhstan, of uranium ore in the world. I think last year its production was about 15,000 tons. It has a reserve of about 600,000 tons of uranium. And, as countries are going forward in the area of renewable energy and nuclear energy, so this becomes very important. So a huge number of areas, as you've said, 24 MoUs have been signed between the two countries in the area of energy, in the area of agriculture. There is a great deal that both the countries can cooperate in, collaborate in, and I think the way forward looks good, looks positive. What has been mentioned in terms of the constraints, yes, there are some constraints. After all, no partnership, no friendship is without some issues on which more work needs to be done.
Okay, so I'll take that across to Mr. Pine and try and understand his point of view on what's the way forward, because we've spoken about how we've turned a new chapter in India-Canada partnership. We've expanded our partnership across the length and breadth of economic cooperation, people-to-people ties, skill development, mobility, and so on and so forth. But the fact that alongside this economic cooperation, there are some strategic sensitivities which persist in India-Canada relationship, and that will be there given the demographics in Canada, which we've already spoken about. The challenge now will be, when we talk about a way forward, how do we balance this? When we've already said it's a renewed India-Canada strategic partnership, the overarching principle, the guiding framework has been described again as Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, taking on from what was also our motto at the G20 in 2023. I think the challenge is to sustain the momentum that's been created following Canadian Prime Minister's visit to India, and how to take this forward, balancing between the potential of cooperation, but most importantly, the sensitivities as well.
Well, first of all, in terms of the potential of the relationship, number one, see, for India to become a $5 trillion economy in the next few years, a $10 trillion economy by 2035, the most important aspect is to have a resilient supply chain framework. Right. So when it comes to resilience, creation of that resilient, multidimensional resilient supply chain framework, Canada being one of the, as ambassadors have mentioned, being one of the largest producer of uranium, if India has to be a country with 100 gigawatt nuclear power generation capacity by 2047, Canada becomes a very important partner, not just a normal economic partner, but potentially, eventually a strategic partner. When it comes to critical minerals, which are very necessary, we have realized in the area of chips, they become a very critical player. Third, as India is aspiring to create its own ecosystem for manufacturing of aeroplanes eventually, I think some of the Canadian companies can play a very critical role here. Eventually, even apart from this, see, the sensitivity issue is this. India has a principled policy of not interfering in the internal affairs of another country, and I don't think India is interested at all into interfering into the internal affairs of Canada. What happens inside Canada is for Canadian government to decide. Right. What is India interested is in this, that do not allow the Canadian soil to be used for anti-India activities. That is where the concerns of India remains and has been a sustained one. Look, there is a history. We cannot deny that there's a history of Kanishka bombing. We can't just expect Canada to come clean on everything. They will not. They have their own compulsions, and I think India as a country is mature enough. Our diplomats are some of the best in the world. They do understand. So they're not expecting that. All they're asking is this, that, please ensure henceforth that beautiful place is not used for anti-India activities. Again, it to presume that Canada can stop it in one day, it will be too much, optimism. But I think over a period of time, Canada does realize that if they do not put a stop into this, eventually it becomes, and it is already becoming, a major internal security crisis for Canada itself. That is an issue. From the Canadian perspective, why India is important, let me put it this way. At a time when Europe is engaged so much into the Ukraine war, which had that huge economic toll on them, at a time when many countries are yet to come out of the COVID crisis that happened probably 3-4 years back, at a time when Middle East, which was considered to be one of the most promising and rich region of the world, look at what is happening there today. At a time when people thought China is the next big thing and is going to surpass United States, look at the kind of challenges China is facing both internally and externally. And the only country, in spite of not conforming to the Western dictums, in spite of not being subordinate to anybody, the only country which, in spite of its own challenges, I'm not saying India doesn't have challenges, the only country which has continued to have, signing free trade agreement one after another, ensuring having world-class global level AI impact summit, talking about, breaching the $5 trillion mark, signing big ticket deals such as potentially in the next few months, we might see a huge deal for Rafale coming up, a huge deal for submarine coming up with Germany. The Canadians are wondering that why should we be left behind? And that is where I think there is so much interest for them to come forward. In fact, when you talk about nuclear energy, it is not just about the supply of uranium. Canada wants to be a very critical player, perhaps, in the area of development of the small modular reactors with India as well. In addition to that, the number of GCC centers that have come up here, the global capability centers, most of the MNCs have it. The Canadian companies also want to be part of that. The Canadians want to be part of the entire electronic component manufacturing ecosystem that India is working on.
That's right. I think you summed it up quite beautifully, that given the potential that lies in India-Canada partnership being elevated to certain levels, but of course because of the sensitivities, the relationship nosedived for the last few years. Now, since there's a new chapter that's being written, the positivity and the momentum that's been created post Prime Minister Carney's visit to India, we hope that both countries are able to minimize the divergences, build more convergences in these areas, which are for the good of people on both sides. Time allows us to take up only that much on the program. Thank you once again, Ambassador Mr. Pine, for joining us, sharing your thoughts, your views on this very important subject. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well.
To watch more programs of Sansad TV, subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and share them.